Welcome back, everyone. And before I introduce our next roundtable, just a reminder that it's your last chance to vote for the Artec Prize. If you haven't already done so, all you need to do is go to the homepage of the With platform and then click on Artec Prize and vote for your favorite startup. And the people who are here should have already voted because they had a QR code. So some of us are very lucky to be here in Istanbul in this exceptional and historical setting. Our next roundtable will address heritage, preservation, and technologies, focusing on Turkey and the region. And we are very pleased to have here with us in Istanbul Zaki Aslan, Regional Director of the International Center of the Study of Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property in the United Arab Emirates. Throughout his career, Zaki Aslan has provided technical advice to the Arab states on issues related to heritage conservation. Zaki Aslan, we look forward to hearing your panel discussion, and I will let you introduce them.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased and honored to be with you all, and thanks to Artec Foundation for this invitation. I'm so pleased to be moderating this session as part also of the work that we do at ICCROM. Those who don't know ICCROM is the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and the Conservation of Cultural Property. Its headquarters is in Rome, and I'm the regional director for the region. And I'm so happy that we will be discussing an important topic today related to historic preservation and the use of technology. Of course, we have 5 panelists today, so it's going to be quite challenging with the time that we have. And we have varied experience and diverse experience in the use of both the technology, but also in the places where our panelists have worked. So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting discussion. Before I start introducing the speakers, I'd like just to mention, I think the importance of this session is really related to the fact that we, in the conservation field in general, I have to say I really enjoyed actually the previous presentations, but sometimes we are so fascinated by the technology and we forget the basic question of why we are doing this and for what purpose. So I think it is really important that through the conservation of heritage and our rich cultural heritage, and this morning you heard the president of the university mentioning the term cultural heritage perhaps 8 times, which actually made it quite important, especially for this region. We in the conservation field, we try to share the richness of cultural heritage with others as professionals. And I think this is really at the essence. We're not just conserving to conserve, but also we're trying to communicate with the others to keep the heritage for future generations and also try to communicate with the public. So this is really the main aspect that I believe will be at the center of our panel today. And if you allow me, I'd like to introduce the speakers very quickly. And I am so happy to have with us first, representing the director of the Sakıp Sabancı Museum, Dr. Nazan Olcher. We have with us Mrs. Nurçin Kural, who's the conservator of the museum, and we really enjoyed the visit to the museum yesterday, and I'm sure you will be sharing with us important aspects of the use of technology for the service of conserving the fantastic collection that you have. But also we have with us online Professor Antonio Almagro. Hello, Antonio. It's great to see you. And Professor Antonio Almagro from Spain He's professor at the Royal Academy of the Fine Arts of San Fernando in Madrid. He is he's known actually in the field, especially in the use of technology in places like Jordan, Morocco, but also Spain, and having the experience to direct the research at the Islamic Arab School of Islamic Studies in Granada. I think there's a vast experience that we can learn from. I think your work in the region also will be very insightful to this session. Then I'd like to welcome also online Mr. Ertu Erbay, who is in Belgium, but he's originally Turkish. And I think his important experience that ranged as an architect, working on modern architecture with, especially, for example, with Zaha Hadid architects, but then moved into the areas of digital preservation and the use of digital means to preserve cultural heritage. His important work at places like Chihilstoon Park and Machine Khana in Kabul in Afghanistan is quite impressive, and I think he will add to this his work also in Afghanistan in other historic sites such as the No Combat Mosque and the Bamiyan Buddha, which were destroyed, if you remember, during the past 2 decades. It was really under discussion. Ertu is a co-founder of Metaxu.studio, and he's based now in Belgium. And then I'd like to move to Dr. Patrick Michel from Switzerland, who's a senior lecturer from the University of Lausanne. And Patrick has a vast experience also in the field of archaeology. He studied archaeology at the University of Lausanne, University of Geneva, and also studied in Rome at the Swiss Institute. But I think what is important of Patrick's work is also the use of technology in promoting what has been happening in the past few years with the archaeology and cultural heritage in the region, and namely in places like Palmyra, and I'm sure he will be talking to us more about that. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to welcome Günce Pelin, Öçgüden, I hope I pronounce it well, who is from Koç University and studying maritime archaeology. And I'm sure with this diverse experience of documenting perhaps underwater archaeology, we will learn much from you. Günce also worked in many other places and different areas of conservation. For example, she did digital documentation, photogrammetry, and laser scanning in places like the tumulus in Midas Mound in Georgian and the Quarantine Island Causeway in Urla. So welcome to you all. It's a long list, as you see. We have 5 personalities with us, and I'm sure the topic that is important, I believe, to this particular forum will be addressing and reflecting actually on the latest developments in this field. I think we have 2 perhaps main issues to start discussing. One is related to the fact, of course, each one has different types of technologies being used for the service of preservation and conservation, and also communicating with the public, the community, etc. But I think one of the aspects that comes to mind is how perhaps when we document cultural heritage, how would we consider that preservation per se? So I would like to start this question perhaps with Professor Antonio Almagro, who's with us, and then we move to other questions.
Well, I think that in the base of conservation must be always the knowledge. We must know what we must preserve and which are the reasons why we preserve these monuments, these elements. And the knowledge must be based on the analysis of the elements. In my particular case, I am an architect. I have worked most of the time with architecture, and the design, the drawing is the base of the analysis for an architect, both if you are creating new architecture or even if you are analyzing the architecture of the past. For this analysis, using the tools that have been all the time normal, which I said is the drawing, technology has always helped, and especially since the middle of the 19th century, the use of photographs has been a great help for this purpose. Photogrammetry was really created for surveying buildings, even before it was applied for topographic means. And in this field is in which I have a long experience of the use of technology for
Right.
purpose of conservation. Of course, technology offers help in many other aspects in establishing chronology for archaeologists, in preserving materials, etc. But well, in my case, this is the field in which I have more experience.
Thank you, Antonio. I think it's really important to focus on these issues related to the documentation work you have done in places like Morocco, Tunisia, and all the parts of the region, especially in Spain. But I think we will come back to follow up on the database that you have created, for which maybe we could talk about, on which we can talk about the access also for people to look at the studies that you have done on many archaeological sites and many historic buildings. We'll come to that in a moment, but I think I'll move to our other speaker from Belgium, Mr. Ertu Erbay, who has worked lately in Afghanistan, and I think that drew my attention, in fact, especially with the current incidents that are taking place in this rich cultural heritage area of the world. Ertu, I know that you want to show something. I don't know if you want to share with us any of the work that you did in Afghanistan now, or you want to speak about it first. I leave it to you.
Let me first thank you all for being here, and thank you for inviting me to this roundtable. First thing about my biography. Yes, I worked in architectural practices in London and in Canada also. Then I moved on to as Zaki mentioned, to Afghanistan. My main task there was not really conservation at the beginning, was more teaching a method of working to the young architects in Kabul, at AKTC, at Arakan Trust for Culture in Kabul. And then I got myself into conservation fairly quickly. So I'd like to share the Buddha of Bamyan. I mean, most of you are familiar with the Buddha of Bamyan. I had the chance to work with a German architect in Kabul, and he had the 3D scan of the niche, what's left of the Buddha really after the Taliban destroyed it in 2001. And I'd like to share that with you. Bear with me 1 second. Share.
Do you want to share the screen?
I would share my screen, yes.
Yes. I don't know. Is there a difficulty to share this? Oh, okay.
No, it should do.
Okay, yeah, it's working.
It should do. So I will explain it to you as I move along. So the purpose of this is you see the Buddha in the background there, or the niche, sorry, and where we are now is our different platforms to help see the Buddha from different distances and different heights. which I think is important. You'll never see it like this, obviously, but we can do it with immersive technologies. And here you have a closer view, and this is all done, extracted from the point cloud, and turned into a mesh using different softwares. I don't know if you want me to get into the software thing, or maybe it's too vast. So this is the platform for the navigation again, and you can travel into immersive technologies at different height fairly easily. Obviously, as you can see, it's not very detailed at the top of the Buddha because of the lack of point at the top, because the 3D scan had to be manually brought at different levels, and it was quite dangerous and quite difficult apparently to do so at that time. So that's what is very much detailed is the bottom of the Buddha, because the point cloud was dense enough to extract valid information. So this is what it is, what's left of it, and I'm glad I did this, and I can share it with anyone interested. If you guys want to have a look inside of it with a headset, if you have one, just let me know. Thank you, Zaki. I think that's all for my small video. I hope it's you can see it clear enough. I will stop this now.
That's fine. I think it's clear, Ertu. That's fine. Thank you very much. I think the documentation that you had in many places, also in Afghanistan, will be useful at this particular time, because many of these sites are undergoing a lot of threat, or expected risks,
definitely.
if you want.
I mean, as you noticed, the Buddha has been bombed.
Yeah.
There are other sites which are at risk. I mean, when we say at risk, it could be any type of risk, really. I mean, we don't have to imagine that the Taliban will destroy everything again. I mean, I'm not saying they won't, but time will do its work, negligence, lack of maintenance, erosion, and everything helps create a situation where you need money to do that, no one cares, and then everything gets derelicted and then disappears over the years. So maybe the new technologies is something that can, I wouldn't say at this stage in a country like Afghanistan, help preserve it, but at least showcase it to the world.
Right. Definitely. I mean, these documents will be really important for the future. I'll move to Patrick Michel, and again, asking the same question, and your experience in the latest project that you led for Palmyra, I think it's quite important, especially after the destruction that occurred by ISIS a few years ago. Tell us a little bit more. How do you think the work that you have done in terms of documenting the heritage will be useful for future work of preservation of such sites which underwent some destruction in the past few years?
Yeah, thank you very much. So what we do at the University of Lausanne is that we use an archaeological archive, which is the archive made by Paul Collard, who was a Swiss archaeologist working in the 50s of last century. And we have first digitized more than 4,000 pictures and plans, and we decided to put it online on an open access database. So the first step was just to give access to the people to this documentation, because this is very important. So we didn't produce a new documentation, we just published the documentation we had as a first step for preservation. Obviously, just producing documentation or publishing the documentation is not preservation per se, and it's manifold, because the other problem, we may deal with this afterwards, but the other problem we face is that how you will preserve the documentation you are producing. So we have to think about the preservation of the material heritage, and then also the preservation of the documentation per se. But that said, the second step in our project was to use the photogrammetry technology that was explained by Ertu briefly in order to produce a 3D model of the sanctuary that doesn't exist anymore. So the Baal Shamin temple in Palmyra was never 3D scanned when it was still standing. So we used our documentation in order to produce a 3D model of the monument. And we are thinking now to find a way to share this heritage with local society. And this is why we have special educational program with NGOs, especially in Northern Jordan in the camp of Azraq, for example. Or this morning, people were dealing with our 3D model because we sent their headset to let Syrian refugees in the camp being able to use these new technologies. So it's a whole process from using the documentation, publishing the documentation, thinking of how to deal with the preservation of the documentation, and then to give access to this documentation to the people in need of this heritage. Because when we speak about heritage, it's not only our heritage or a common heritage that we have to share, but we have to think about identity reconstruction in a post-war context that is also very, very important.
Right. Thank you very much, Patrick. I think this is really important. And we'll come back to some of the points you raised, which I think are really important. One is related to accessibility and the community engagement, and the other related to the future of the documents and the digital documentation that we have. We'll come back to this in a moment. And before we move to our host, I would like to ask Günce about her experience in documenting underwater cultural heritage, which I think through which you use different techniques. We saw 3D laser scanning, photogrammetry on the land. What did you do underwater?
Basically for underwater, accessibility is also a big issue because you have limited time. Most of the people are not divers, so they cannot go and see. So it's both for audience and the researcher, the accessibility is a problem. We have to do as much as digital documentation as possible in order to be able to work on the material, even though we are not on the field, because we have average of an hour per dive in a day. You can only have 2 dives, for example. So you only have 2 hours to work on your material. So you need extra time to think and to process and to think about what your questions are. So we have, yes, additional problems and equipment that we have to have in order to do the digital documentation on field. As I said, biggest problem is the time. You have to be really planned and be really efficient in order to complete your task in a given 2 hours. And so basically, we plan ahead, we get our equipment ready and make sure it works. We do photogrammetry mostly underwater. It's almost the same as you do on land, but there are some problems that can caused by the environment underwater. First of all, it's the visibility may be a problem, because depending on the temperature of the water and how overgrown the area is, the water will have microorganisms that create sort of noise, let's say, in your images. So you won't be able to see what you are taking photo of. So you have to go closer, and it takes more time, more photos, so more data to process, and then that causes problem with space as well, because then you have to keep those photos, and the file will be bigger, so you need bigger storage area, and this goes and goes and goes.
Do you think by documenting such heritage, you're contributing to its preservation?
Yes, because underwater is always changing. So one day you can find something somewhere, the next day it might not be there because of the movement under the water. The currents will take you the object somewhere else. So the context can change based on, in each day.
Right. Okay, Günce, we'll come back to this idea of why you are doing this documentation and how you provide access to people to appreciate and understand such kind of heritage, which is a different type of heritage that people don't see, like monuments and sites. Okay, so we'll move to our dear colleague Nurçin, who's representing Dr. Nazan Ulcher, to talk to us more about the important work, I believe, that you are doing here at the museum. So I know that you want to show us some slides as well.
Yes.
So please let us know.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And my topic is a little different, maybe from my colleagues. Can I see my presentation?
There.
Okay. Okay. So I would like to talk about scientific analysis and conservation of Osman Hamdi Bey's paintings project, emphasizing the technological collaborations between Sakıp Sabancı Museum and the institutions of particular universities which are component in conservation sciences in Istanbul. Conservation and scientific research on the 6 paintings by Osman Hamdi Bey was carried on as a part of America's Merrill Lynch Global Art Conservation Project, and which constitutes the most comprehensive conservation and scientific research on Osman Hamdi Bey's paintings today. The pioneering project in Turkey proves that scientific methods can provide opportunities for studying the techniques of artists, as well as giving information about methods for dating works of art. It also provides guidance for research on a comparative study of techniques and materials of paintings claimed to be Osman Hamdi Bey. The first step of the project was the X-ray imaging technique. This method provided information about the structure under the painting surface and the paint content, as well as clues to the artist's technique. At the same time, determined the physical condition of the painting. They show how the metal elements within the pigments are dispersed, thus enabling us to trace the artist's brush strokes on the canvas. The image also shows any changes the artist made on the painting, traces of restoration work, and the transformation it has gone over time. Under the investigation of the mosque painting, X-ray analysis revealed that the green-brown part at the bottom of the painting, also bearing this artist's signature, was completely damaged in the past. The fact that the canvas was not destroyed indicated that the damage was caused by a flood, which would harm only the paint layer rather than the total texture. This was followed by chemical analysis to determine the structure and color of the materials he used, the layers, and the texture of the paint. Pigment analysis consists of the methods required to obtain information regarding the materials and techniques used by the artist and to date the painting. These samples are first analyzed with scanning electron microscope with energy dispersive spectroscopy. Sabancı University Nanotechnology Research and Application Center conducted the analysis in their laboratories. They determined the elemental content of the pigments used by the artists. Right after the elemental analysis, Raman spectroscopy enabled us to define the molecular and structural characteristics of these pigments. Koç University Surface Science and Technology Center contributed to this process by their Raman spectroscopy device. One example of this would be Hoca reading Quran. Cross-sections of the paint samples indicate that the artist started painting with dark colors and applied light colors later. The cross-sections show that the pigment's granules are not dispersed homogeneously in the paint, thus making clear that the artist himself combined the colors on his palette using the pigments and linseed oil. Analysis revealed that the artist added cobalt blue to ultramarine pigment to obtain a more opaque color, perhaps to add a deeper and greener hue. Thanks to both institutions, we created a database of pigments which Osman Hamdi Bey used in the colors of these 6 paintings. The organic structure of the canvas material of 6 paintings was analyzed. through Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, and the data was classified through the principal component analysis method to determine their characteristics. These analyses were run in Istanbul Technical University Chemistry Department. Yeah, in general, this is the information that I want to tell you. This is a very limited part of it.
That's great. In fact, as you see, the notion of documentation can mean many things. And as I mentioned earlier, the why, defining the why we do it is really important. In this case, we are talking about understanding. And I think there is no documentation without that aspect of trying to have a better understanding, being it on an object or a site or a building. So I think this is really important, and what is sometimes we call it informed conservation. In order to go to the next step, we need to be well informed using different technologies and different techniques. So thank you, Nurçin, for that. I think that added to the various experiences that we have on this panel. I'm going back to Professor Almagro, if you allow me. I don't know if we could get back to Professor. Can we stop sharing the screen, please? Tell us a little bit more about the data that you created, the metadata of all the projects that you have documented. I think that would be of interest. Thank you, Antonio.
This year is the 50th anniversary of my graduation in architecture. So I have been documenting monuments for half a century. I have produced a big amount of drawings, and in this last year, of course, in digital format. For this, in my opinion, the importance of the documentation for provide knowledge on the heritage must be related with the availability of these documents for other people, for responsibles of
so people are able to access these documents easily now.
For this reason, in the Royal Academy of San Fernando in Madrid, that is an institution created in the 18th century, and where projects of recording were carried out even in the 18th century. They record with the best architects of that moment. They record the Alhambra of Granada and the Mosque of Cordoba. They have developed a big project of digitizing the documents and put it on a database. And taking advantage of this project, I have provided to the Academy all the documents I have made during those years. And I have updated more than 2,000 drawings, plans of most of the most important Islamic buildings of Spain, but also documents from Morocco, from Jordan, where I have also worked for a long time. And all these documents, I don't know if I can share.
Please do quickly so that the audience maybe can understand what kind of data you are sharing with the public.
See?
Antonio, if it's difficult, we come back to this a bit later, so for the sake of time. So prepare it, and then we could maybe visit it once you're ready. I wanted to move perhaps to the other aspect that we wanted to discuss today related to, we talked about sharing the information, we talked about, accessibility, and in many cases we have seen that many of you have provided that. You talked about it very briefly perhaps, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. But I think what is more important is to think about also how we could think about the aspect of sustainability. Now we have the documents, all of you have produced different types of documents depending on the objects or the buildings or the sites you are dealing with. How do you think we could think about, to sustain this information so we don't lose it, and it will keep there to access it, to help both the researchers but also the public to really understand the heritage in all different forms that we have discussed now in the future. So maybe I'll ask this question first to Ertu, of the work that you have done so far, particularly perhaps in Afghanistan. How do you think of this idea of sharing the data? How you could think about preserving the digital information that you have? How do we think about the future of such documents?
I think we are in a moment where there's new technologies that are coming into the game, such as the virtual reality headset, which is a fairly new item, and that will help to as Patrick was mentioning, to help people see what they cannot see anymore, or what they cannot see because it doesn't exist anymore, or because it's too far. And I think the more the database or the information or the 3D model is shared, the more people are made aware, the more they will also the locals. I mean, Michel is not only for everyone else; it's also for the locals. They will get familiar with it, and then they will let's say help document and preserve the site. I think everything comes to a relation between people and sharing as much as possible. We're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for, let's say, for the people and for the future. And when, unfortunately, the building will have disappeared. Going back to the new technologies, what the new technology brings more than a traditional form of documentation is that you can, with the headset, you can be on a one-to-one scale inside the space, and you can have a sense of scale, which you don't have on a screen or on a paper. I'm not saying one replaces the other. I'm saying that everything is complementary, but some are able to have more impact as with the new technologies, and help people to see how big this space is. For example, the Buddha of Pangan is around 50 meters, the small one, and you don't perceive it on a screen. But once you're inside and you look up with the headset, everything changed. And I think to sustain it, to make it more, we have to make it more affordable to people, share it with people, and show them new methods of seeing the projects.
Right. Thank you, Ertu. I think that is clear. But I think, Antonio, are we ready to share your slide quickly? Okay.
Yeah. This is the database of the Academy, in which you have hundreds of drawings. These are the one produced by me. This is the mosque. Here are the Mosque of Cordoba with photogrammetric drawings of the elevation, everything. So all these drawings you can easily download and are absolutely open to everybody, not only to curators or responsibles of conservation, but everybody can enter and have the possibility of download the drawings that are in PDF format, but in large size, so with all the detail of these drawings.
Fantastic. Thank you, Antonio. It's just for the sake of time. Yeah, if we need to move quickly, we have only a few minutes left, so I want to give the chance to our other speakers. But I think you can continue sharing the slides if you wish. I think this issue of data sharing, the issue of digital preservation. Now we have media and certain medium on which we have, you know, the data saved. What do you think, Patrick? What do you think about the future of such
I think
documents?
it's a challenge because we can absolutely not be sure. I mean, I'm a historian and archaeologist. I'm not a digital scientist, but when I speak with digital scientists, they are never afraid about the future, but they can never say, oh, for sure, in 10 years you will be, I mean, you will have the capacity to access to the documentation. So it's a real challenge. The problem that I see is that we have to spend time and obviously to spend money now to find a way to preserve and to think about the sustainability of this new digital heritage when we should maybe first care about tangible heritage. So it's like, it's a paradox, and we are facing this. So the new technologies obviously are a big chance, but we are also facing new challenges. And I mean, I think we have absolutely no clue about the future. We hope that the technologies will still be accessible, but it's a real question. I don't know what my colleagues think about it.
By the way, I just have to add that yesterday I was impressed by the work that was done by one of the professors at the university, Sabancı University. They collected several papers, and there's a publication on this particular aspect, which I think is quite important to save, to see how we think about the future of digital preservation. So I think, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's something that would require scientists like the professor we met yesterday, who's a mathematician, and he worked with other scientists in this area. I want to have some final words by everyone, and I want to ask perhaps first Nurçin about, we talk about sharing, but also we talk about collaboration. How do you think the collaboration in such kind of work, and you talked about different types of technology, thinking about the micro, if you want, analysis of material culture, how do you think this collaboration between the different, you know, organizations and entities can work?
Well, I think it's very important because as one institution, you cannot have everything in your hands. So if you want to determine the best quality of the work, it's very good. It's very useful to apply the other institutions which have the capacity of making research and which have the instruments and technological devices and so on. So it's so important to share knowledge in between each other because, for example, a university might not have a collection, a proper collection which can be a sample of a project, but on the other hand, we have Sabancı Museum have a very good quality of collection. So this may be a good interaction between institutions. So
the collaboration and sharing among institutions is also similar important to sharing with the public, as Patrick said. The work that they did for Palmyra with communities, which I think is really important. Günce, in one short sentence, could you think about, you know, the future of digital preservation, but also access to knowledge of underwater cultural heritage?
Well, my actually biggest concern is today the digital data is not that much. Once it gets more accessible and a lot more in a cumulative way, how are we going to arrange that extensive amount of data? So we should start from today to organize whatever we want to, like, do a great prediction and like decide how we're going to...
Don't you think that communicating this information that you gathered for the public is quite important as well? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also.
Do you think we could, you know, move such objects to museums or recreate them or show images? What would be the right approach to share knowledge?
3D printing is now a trend. I guess we can do that. Instead of, in terms of underwater objects, it's extremely difficult to preserve them and extremely difficult to exhibit them. So, for example, such models or such 3D printed objects would be extremely helpful.
That brings me to a question perhaps to Patrick about the Arch of Palmyra, the Arch of Triumph. A few years ago, it was recreated by 3D printing by the digital lab of Oxford University, and it traveled in London, Dubai, Geneva, and many other places. What do you think of such an approach?
Well, that was a project of the Institute for Digital Archaeology. The idea was maybe more to raise awareness about what happened in Syria. The problem, if we look at the quality of this 3D print that was made of Egyptian marble in Carrara, so the work was done in Italy, is that it was really expensive. And then when you look at the quality is not that good, so you cannot say it's a real replica of the lost monument. Then the scale is not the same, it's about 2/3, so it's not a 1-to-1 scale, and then it's just a part of the monument itself. So what is the aim of such an object when it's produced in the Western world and it's shown almost only in the Western world? So New York, London, Geneva, Florence, Dubai, okay. But how do you reach local communities, and what is the purpose and the aim for that?
Again, we go back to the aim
for
and the
those
why.
people.
Yeah.
This is really not clear for me, and it was sometimes interpreted as post-imperialism. I don't think we should interpret it that way or to go so far in the interpretation, but it's problematic.
Right. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I wish we could continue this session. There are many other ideas we share, but the time was against us. I don't think even we could have any question, right? Right. So unfortunately, we have to end the session. I'd like to thank all the speakers, the panelists, for such a contribution to this interesting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.